Zero trust doesn't simplify security, it multiplies permissions. Cloud security today revolves around one big idea. Identity is the new perimeter. Identity is the new perimeter. Every request has an identity. Every identity has permissions. Every permission defines what the system can do. This is the foundation of modern cloud security. Zero trust, least privilege, strong identity foundations. And if you listen to cloud vendors, the message is clear. Security becomes simpler. But after designing and operating large cloud systems, I've seen something very different happen. The identity system slowly becomes larger and more complex than the application itself. Thousands of roles, thousands of permissions, policies interacting across services, accounts, and organizations. And suddenly, the hardest part of operating the system isn't the software anymore. It's the permission graph. Because zero trust doesn't simplify security, it multiplies permissions. The idea behind zero trust is actually elegant. Instead of trusting networks, machines, or environments, you trust identity. A Lambda function gets a role. A service assumes an identity. A developer authenticates through federation, and every action is evaluated through IAM. From an architectural perspective, this is incredibly powerful. You can define permissions down to the exact action. A function can write to exactly one DynamoDB table. A service can read from exactly one S3 bucket. A deployment pipeline can modify only the resources it owns. This is the promise of least privilege. Every actor gets exactly the permissions it needs. No more, no less. But something interesting happens once systems grow. At some point, every cloud team experiences the same moment. Something fails. A Lambda cannot access a resource. An event does not trigger. A pipeline fails halfway through deployment. The application code is correct. The infrastructure is correct. But the system still refuses to work. Because somewhere inside the identity model, a permission is missing. And suddenly, engineers are not debugging code anymore. They are debugging the permission system. This happens because permissions are rarely simple rules. They form graphs of dependencies. A Lambda writing to DynamoDB might require permissions for DynamoDB, CloudWatch logs, KMS encryption, event bridge triggers, and tracing. Each of those services may introduce additional policies. Resource policies, key policies, service-linked roles. So what looked like a single permission becomes a network of authorization relationships. Multiply that across hundreds of services, multiple environments, and several AWS accounts. Now, identity stops being configuration. Identity becomes a system. And once identity becomes a system, it behaves like one. At scale, this produces something almost every cloud organization eventually encounters. IAM policy sprawl. Every service gets a role. Every automation gets a role. Every pipeline gets a role. And because least privilege is extremely granular, most of these roles become slightly different. Instead of a small number of security policies, you end up with hundreds of tiny permission fragments across the environment. Ironically, the more seriously you apply least privilege, the faster this permission system grows. There is also a practical side effect many architects know all too well. Accidental lockouts. A policy is deployed. Suddenly, a pipeline cannot deploy anymore. A service cannot assume its role. A resource becomes inaccessible. Because somewhere in the system, a condition blocks the request, a deny rule overrides another policy, or a trust relationship fails. At that point, debugging security feels less like configuration and more like solving a logic puzzle inside a distributed system. From a systems thinking perspective, this outcome is not surprising. When cloud security moved away from networks, the complexity did not disappear. It moved. It moved into identities, into roles, into permission relationships. And once enough services exist, those permission relationships begin behaving like a system of their own. So zero trust did not remove security complexity. It relocated it into identity graphs. And that changes the role of architecture. The real architectural question is no longer whether to implement zero trust. In cloud environments, that decision is already made. The real question is whether the organization can understand and operate the identity system it creates. Because once permissions multiply, security stops being configuration and becomes part of the architecture itself. And once identity becomes architecture, architects have to design it like one. This is systems thinking for architects.